A hand snatched back at his robes, tugging. "Wizard!" came a sour voice from behind. "You will tend to me first." Zed turned to a face that matched the voice and maybe outdid it a little. "I am Lady Ordith Condith de Dakovich, House of Burglass. This wench is nothing but my body servant. Had she been as quick as she should have been, I wouldn't be suffering so. I could have been killed. As slow as she was, you will tend to me first. I could expire at any moment." Zed could tell without touching her that her injuries were minor. "Forgive me, my lady." He made a show of putting his fingers to her head. As he thought, a hard bruise to her ribs, a few lesser to her legs, and a small gash on her arm requiring at most a stitch or two. "Well?" She clutched at the silver ruffles at her neck. "Wizards! Next to worthless, if you want to know the truth of it. And these guards, I think they were asleep at their posts. Lord Rahul shall hear of this. Well, what of my injuries?" "My lady, I'm not sure there is anything I can do for you." "What?" She snatched the neck of his robes and gave it a snug yank. "You had better see that there is, or I will see that Lord Rahul has your head on a pike. See what good your lazy magic does you then." "Of course, my lady. I will endeavor to do my best." He ripped the small gash in the dark maroon satin fabric of the sleeve, making it a huge hanging flag, and then put a hand back on the shoulder of the woman with the blue stone. She moaned as he blocked some of her pain and gave her strength. Her ragged breathing evened. He kept his hand on her, trickling in a little magic of reassurance and comfort. Lady Ordith shrieked, "Ah! My dress! You've ruined it!" "Sorry, my lady, but we can't risk the wound festering. I would rather lose the dress than the arm, wouldn't you agree?" "Well, yes, I guess." 10 or 15 stitches should do it," he said to the sturdily built healer bent over between the two women on the floor. Her hard blue-gray eyes glanced to the small wound, then back to the wizard. "I'm sure you know best, Wizard Zorander," she said in an even voice, betraying only in her gaze to him that she understood his true intent. "What? You're going to let this ox of a midwife do your work for you?" "My lady, I am an old man. I've never had any talent for sewing, and my hands shake something awful. I'm afraid I would do more damage than I would repair. But if you insist, I will try my best." "No, no," she sniffed. "Let the ox do it." "Very well." He looked up at the healer. No emotion touched her features, but splotches of red colored her cheeks. "I fear there is only one hope for her other injuries, considering the pain she is in. Do you have any wattle root in those pockets of yours?" She gave a little frown of puzzlement. "Yes." "But good." Zed cut her off. "I think 2 cubes should be sufficient." Her eyebrow lifted. "2?" "Don't you try to be skippy with me," Lady Ordith screeched. "If there isn't enough to go around, then someone of lesser importance will just have to go short. You will give me the full dose." "Very well." Zed glanced up at the healer. "Administer her the full dose. 3 cubes. Shredded, not whole." The healer's eyes opened a little wider, and she incredulously mouthed, "Shredded?" Zed squinted and nodded his insistence. The corners of her mouth curled up in a tightly controlled smile. Wattle root would only take the pain of the minor injuries, but it needed only to be swallowed whole. Only one small cube was all that was needed. Shredded, and that much of it would set Lady Ordov's plumbing afire. The good lady was going to be spending the better part of the next week in her privy. "What is your name, my dear?" he asked the healer. "Kelly Halleck." Zed let out a tired sigh. "Kelly, are there any others that are beyond your considerable talents?" "No, sir. Medea and Annalie are finishing with the last of them." "Then will you please take Lady Ordith somewhere where she will be more comfortable while you tend to her?" Kelly glanced down at the woman Zed had a comforting hand to the rip across her abdomen and back up to his eyes. "Of course, Wizard Zorander. You look to be very tired. If you would come to me later, I will fix you a Stenling tea." The small smile touched the corners of her mouth again. Zed couldn't keep a grin from his own face. Besides restoring alertness, Stedling tea was also used to give lovers stamina, and by the glint in her eye, he judged her to be a fine brewer of Stedling tea. He gave Kelly a wink. "Perhaps I will." Any other time he might have given it serious consideration. Kelly was a handsome woman, but right now that was about the farthest thing from his mind. "Lady Orith, what is your body servant's name?" "Deborah Benevere, and a worthless girl she is too, lazy and impudent." "Well, you will not be burdened with her inadequate service any longer. She is going to need a long time to recover, and you are shortly going to be leaving the palace." "Leaving? What do you mean, leaving?" She put her nose in the air. "I have no intention of leaving." "The palace is no longer safe for a lady of your importance. You will have to leave for your own protection. As you said yourself, the gods are asleep half the time. You will have to be on your way." "Well, I simply have no intention of—" "Kelly," he gave her a firm look, "please help Lady Ordith to a place where you can tend to her." Kelly was dragging the Lady Ordith off like a load of wash before she had the chance to cause any more trouble. Zed turned a warm smile to Deborah and brushed some of her short, sandy hair back off her face. She held one arm against her grievous wound. Zed had managed to halt most of the bleeding, but that wasn't going to save her. What was outside had to be put back in its place inside. "Thank you, sir. I'm feeling much better now. If you could help me to my feet, I will be out of your way." "Lie still, child," he said softly. "We must talk." With a hard glance, he moved onlookers back. Soldiers of the first file had only to see that one brief look, and they were already pushing people away. Her lip trembled as her breast rose and fell more rapidly. She managed a little nod. "I'm going to die, aren't I?" "I won't lie to you, child. Your wound is at the limit of my talents, were I well rested. You don't have time for me to rest. If I don't do something, you will die. If I try, I might hasten the end." "How long?" "If I do nothing, maybe hours, maybe the night. I could ease the pain enough to at least make it the last of it tolerable." She closed her eyes as tears seeped from the corners. "I never thought I cared to live." "Because of the seer's stone you wear?" Her eyes snapped open. "You know! You recognize the stone? You know what I am." "I do. The time is long past when people knew a seer by the stone, but I am old. I have seen such before. That is why you didn't want me to help you. You feel what the touch might do to me." She nodded weakly. "But I find I suddenly care to live." Zed patted her shoulder. "That is what I wanted to know, child. Worry not about me. I am a wizard of the First Order, not some novice." "The First Order? I did not know one was left. Please, sir, do not risk yourself on the likes of me. Zed smiled. Not much of a risk, only a little pain. My name is Zed. She thought for a moment. Then her free hand clutched his arm. Zed, if I am to have a choice, I choose to try for life. Zed smiled a little and stroked her cold, sweaty forehead. Then I promise to give you my most earnest effort. She nodded as she gripped his arm, gripped her only chance. Is there anything you can do, Deborah, to hold aside the pain of visions? She bit her lower lip and shook her head as tears sprang anew. I'm sorry. Perhaps you shouldn't. Hush, child, he comforted. Zed took a deep breath and laid a hand over the arm that held her guts back. He put the palm of his other hand gently over her eyes. This was not something he could fix from the outside. It had to be repaired from within, with her own mind's aid. It could kill her and him. He braced himself and released the barrier in his mind. The impact of pain took the wind from his lungs. He didn't dare to spare the energy to draw a breath. He gritted his teeth and fought it with muscles hardened to stone with the strain. He hadn't even touched the pain of the wound yet. He had to deal with the pain of her visions, get past them before he could cope with that problem. Agony sucked his mind into a river of blackness. Specters of her visions swirled past. He could only guess at their meaning, but the pain of their reality was all too vivid. Tears flooded from his tightly closed eyes. His whole body shook as he struggled to fight through the torrent of anguish. He knew he couldn't allow himself to be pulled along with it, or he would be lost, consumed. The emotions of her visions buffeted him as he was swept deeper and deeper into her mind. Dark thoughts just beyond the surface of perception clawed at his will, trying to drag him into the depths of hopelessness, abandon. His own painful memories washed to the surface of his consciousness to join with Deborah's lifetime of sorrow in a convergence of terrible agony and madness. Only his experience and resolve kept his sanity, his free will from being pulled into the bottomless waters of bitterness and grief. At last, he broke through the calm, white light at the center of her being. Zed revealed in the comparatively mild pain of her life-threatening wound. Reality could seldom match the imagination, and in the imagination, the pain was real. All around the calm center, the cold darkness of eternal night encroached on the waning warmth and life of her life. Impatient to shroud forever Deborah's spirit, Zed pulled back that shroud to let the light of his gift warm her spirit with life and vitality. The shadows receded before the power of his additive magic. The strength of that magic, its exigency for the well-being of life, drew the exposed organs back to where the Creator intended them. Zed did not yet dare to spare anything to block her suffering. Deborah's back arched. She wailed in pain. He too felt her pain. His own abdomen flamed with the same agony she felt. He shook with searing sharpness of it. When the hardest, that which was beyond his comprehension, was finished, he at last spared a portion of the magic to block her pain. Deborah sagged against the floor with a moan of relief. He felt the relief in his own body. Directing the flow of magic, Zed finished the healing. He used his power to pull her wound together, letting tissue knit to tissue, flesh to flesh, layer upon layer, to the surface of skin, joining as if it had never been parted. Finished at last, Zed only had to escape her mind. That was as dangerous as entering, and his strength was nearly gone. He had given it over to her. Rather than wasting any more time worrying about it, he released himself into the flow of agony. Nearly an hour after he'd begun, he found himself on his knees, hunched over, weeping uncontrollably. Deborah was sitting up with her arms around him, holding his head to her shoulder. As soon as he was aware that he was back, he managed to bring himself under control and straighten. He glanced around the hall. Everyone had been pushed back a goodly distance beyond earshot. None had any interest in being near a wizard when he was wielding magic, and that left people screaming as no one had any interest in being near a wizard when he was wielding magic. That left people screaming as Deborah had done. There, he said, at last, with a modicum of restored dignity. That wasn't so bad. I believe all is well now, child. Deborah laughed a quietly shaky laugh and hugged him tight. I was taught a wizard couldn't heal a seer. Zed managed to get a bony finger in the air. No ordinary wizard can, my dear, but I am Zedekis Zorander, wizard of the First Order. Deborah wiped a tear from her cheek. I have nothing of value to repay you with except this. She unhooked the gold chain that ran through her hair and brought it down, putting it in his hand. Please, accept this humble offering. Zed looked down at the chain with the blue stone. That is very kind of you, Deborah Benevere. I am touched. Zed felt a pang of guilt for having planted the impulse in her mind. It is a fine chain, and I will accept it in humble gratitude. He used a threading thin of stream of power to separate the stone from its mounting. He handed the stone back. He only needed the chain. But the chain is payment enough. Keep your stone. It is yours by right. She closed her fingers around the stone with a nod and gave him a kiss on the cheek. He accepted the peck with a smile. And now, my dear, you will need to rest. I have used a good deal of your strength to put things right. Maybe a few days of bed rest and you will be as good as new. I fear that you have not only left me healed, but also without employment. I must find work to feed myself. She looked down at the bloody shredded rip in her green dress, and to clothe myself. Why were you wearing the stone if you were a servant of the Lady Ordith? Not many people know what the stone signifies. Lady Ordith didn't. Her husband, the Duke, did. He wanted my services, but his wife would never have allowed a woman in his employ, so he had me placed as her servant. I know it's not the most honorable thing for a seer to place herself covertly, but there is much starvation in Burglass. My family knew of my ability and closed their doors to me, afraid of the visions I might have of them. Before my grandmother passed, she put her stone in my hand, saying if I wore horrors, she would be honored. Deborah pressed the fist with the stone to her cheek. Thank you for not accepting it, for understanding. Zed felt a renewed pang of guilt. And so this Duke had you taken in and used you for his own purposes. Yes, maybe a dozen years ago. But because I was Lady Orth's body servant, I was almost always present at any meeting or function. The Duke would come to me later, and I would tell him whatever I saw of his adversaries. With my help, he made more of his power and wealth. Virtually no one knows any more of the stone of a seer. He disdained people, Zed said. People who ignored the old knowledge. He mocked his opponent's ignorance by having you wear the stone openly. He also had me keep an eye to the Lady Ordith. It prevented her from succeeding at making herself a widow. So now she contents herself with being absent from the Duke's house whenever she can. She will not be displeased to be rid of me. The Duke who used his strings of power to keep me employed when the Lady Ordith would have wished otherwise. Why would she be displeased with your services? Zed grinned. Are you lazy and rude as she claims? He said with a smile. Deborah smiled back, the fine wrinkles at the corners of her eyes deepening. No, it's the visions. Sometimes when I have them, well, you felt some of the hurt when you healed me, though it's not as bad as that for me, I think, but sometimes the hurt keeps me from her service for a time. Zed rubbed his chin. Well, since you are out of employment, you will be a guest here at the People's Palace until you are recovered. I have some little influence around here." He marveled at the sudden truth of that, and pulled a purse from a pocket in his robes. He gave it a jingle. "For your expenses and a wage, if I can convince you to take up a new employer." She hefted the purse in her palm, testing its weight. "If this be copper, it is insufficient for any but you," she smiled, and leaned a little closer, her eyes merry and scolding at the same time. "And if it be silver, it's too much." Zed gave her a grave expression. "It's gold." Startled, she blinked. "But it's not for me," she said. Zed said, "No, it's not for you, child, but mainly who you will be working for." She stared at the purse of gold in her hand, then looked back at him. "Who then?" "Richard, the new Lord Rahul." Deborah paled and shook her head vigorously, shoulders hunching up. She shoved the purse back in Zed's hand. "No." Even paler, she shook her head again. "No, I'm sorry. I don't want to work for him. No." Zed frowned. "He is not an evil person. He is quite kind-hearted, in fact." "I know that." "You know who he is?" "I know. I saw him yesterday, the first day of winter." "And you had a vision when you saw him?" "Yes." "Deborah, tell me what you saw. Every bit of it, please. It's important."